This session is all about programmatic. We've had one programmatic session earlier today, but this one is kind of looking at programmatic in a bit more depth. We're going to put a bit of context around it as well, so we'll have a look at what actually programmatic is, because many people here are still questioning that and still want to know exactly what it is. So to help us kind of get through that, we'll have a chat about that. We'll have a chat about where programmatic goes next, the challenges with it, how it works, why it should be employed and why it should be used by brands, and we'll actually touch on that that white elephant in the room as well, about how do the role of agencies fit in with this these new tech and brands. Do they miss the agencies out? Are they part of it? Do they have to remodel? All will be revealed as we have this conversation. So please welcome on stage, we have Eric Wasserman, who is from Mediamath. Give a round of applause, please. Have a seat, young man.
Thank you, sir.
And obviously, we don't want to just me and Eric. We have Henk van Nijkerk, who's from Adap TV. Yay!
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, everyone sitting comfortably? Good, good, good. Okay, so let's put a bit of context around programmatic. I know there was a talk earlier, but just kind of to clear everything up, how would you define programmatic?
Oh, that's an easy one, right? Shall
Go
I go
for it,
first?
my
Shall I
friend.
go first? I think it's unfortunate that we always have these nomenclatures and words and trying to define them, right? I think a lot of people will say, well, it's just RTB, it's just a race to the bottom, it's just tools, and that's the next thing, right? I think we look at programmatic and we think of it as the automation of the buying and selling process. RTB really is just the pipes that are being used here. I think of RTB as just the next version of ad serving between buyers and sellers. And that there are going to be many different ways that buyers and sellers will transact with each other through these pipes. So if we think of programmatic, we think of RTB, but we think of it just as the piping, and we think of the different business models and ways of transacting that's going to happen between buyers and sellers.
And Eric, are you happy with that definition? Would you like to add some more to that?
You know, I'll add some words. Programmatic describes increasingly automated means of connecting marketers with consumers. Quite to your point, Hank, the ways in which the marketplace began, about 7 years ago when we began our business at Mediamath, things were pretty rudimentary and liquidity was quite low, and the means of accessing consumers were pretty straightforward. It was primarily display advertising. Since then, owing to lots of factors, including the quality of brands who are participating in programmatic marketplaces and the quality commensurately of publishers who are participating as well, we see the rising of multiple channels, we see the activation of data, and we see the ability, again, for consumers to interact with and communicate with their customers across diverse means and to different degrees of clarity around the world, and that brings us here today to talk about what the future of advertising is, because it's certainly not, the future of digital is not transacting with consumers in a manual way, and in a way that is disparate with respect to how the brand seeks to grow their relationships with consumers.
And do you think, I suppose there's a couple of questions here really, is how it's kind of risen to the top of the media agenda kind of recently and so quickly, and it's kind of on the top of everyone's lips as a part of the industry, and kind of what has driven that rise, do you think?
I think initially the proposition was we have a highly efficient marketplace. We have lots of opportunity, we have lots of liquidity in the marketplace, and by which we mean the ability to get messages in front of consumers at scale. But the primary sales proposition was this will be cheaper for you. And that really only lasts for so long, where the real proposition today is the ability to match value of a consumer with media value. So the prospect of getting a relevant message in front of a user at a value that the brand and that the agency on their behalf can both understand, tune, and ensure the execution of, has created a new set of propositions for multiple technologies in the marketplace, each of whom contribute to the clarity and the ability for brands to connect with consumers at scale.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that and say that I think, It started off probably as an efficiency play, but more and more it's because of it being very effective. So yes, it starts off as efficiencies in pricing and transacting, and then becomes more efficient and effective actually over time. But I think, to go back to, why is this happening? I think there are probably 3, maybe 4, depending on how you count, and I don't count that well, trends that are shaping why programmatic is being employed by the buy side and the sell side. I think the first, and let me just speak about sight, sound, and motion, video, and linear broadcast television, because this is what Adap TV does. I think the first is that so much of the consumption has shifted from broadcast into IP-delivered content, right? The buyers and the consumers, the consumers, I would say, are consuming the content there. It's changing the way that sight, sound, and motion will be consumed. There's multiple devices now, tablets, over-the-top TV, there's desktop, there's obviously linear television itself as well, VOD inside of that space. So I think that's one of the big things that is shifting people down the path of using more tools and better ways to connect with each other. And frankly, the digital side is bringing a lot of that revolution to the space. I think the other area why programmatic is rising is that, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, is that people used to be able to do things through Excel spreadsheets and telephone calls and emails and faxes. I'm that old that I still know what a fax machine is, right? And more tools are there now for us to automate that process. So again, part of automation and RTB and programmatic is not just about RTB, but the automation of these things. And then I think the third thing that is a big driver, we see it every day, is that buyers and sellers are starting to, transact with each other. In the past, if you were buying TV, you were buying content and context, and you derived an audience off of Nielsen or ComScore metrics from that. Well, in digital and through IP delivery, I actually know who the audience is. So you're starting to see, and it started in display and now has moved into video, and it will move into linear television, the ability for you to target and buy and sell on an impression-by-impression basis, to buy the audience that you want. So I think these are probably 3 of the biggest trends that are happening as we speak, right? And then obviously the proliferation of devices that is pushing us down this path of using tools more and more.
And I suppose that kind of brings with itself that we touched on the data and actually understanding and knowing exactly who that audience is, so that proper targeting. I suppose the question comes around with who actually owns that data? Does it become you guys who are providing the piping? Is it the brand that owns that?
You promised easy questions.
This is a nice easy one. Come on.
Who owns this
data? This is what the crowd wants to know,
This is not about data and who owns it. Don't go there. Come on.
But in all seriousness, because you have that, that data's going to come through the pipelines. It's going to be used. I mean, how does it work? I suppose what I'm trying to say is that to give a clearer picture of the programmatic landscape, really, so kind of how it works from brands down to the piping, down to the agency. How does that kind of family tree work, if you like?
I think that there is a very clear proposition that there is a differentiation between the means by which you act on data and the ownership of that data. From our perspective, our clients, which include agencies, which include their trading desks, which include brands, license our technology, and what they are licensing is, lots of things, but the ability to push valuable and proprietary information into a system that is able to federate that across multiple media channels. That does not imply that we take or retain ownership over that valuable data. It does mean that we have the obligation to steward it in the proper way, and in a way that doesn't imply our ownership of it. So that also comes with it the promises of not abusing that data. So it means we're not going to sell a client's data to another client. Those 2 clients, by the way, can decide to transact with each other in a transparent way, and they can come to agreement commercially to do that. Our system enables that, but innately, the ownership question is, I think, reasonably straightforward.
Yeah, I think there's 3 primary parties in any transaction, especially if there's data concerned, right? You've got the buyer, with their data, and you've got the seller with their data, and then typically you would have an operator, a vendor like ourselves, that use a combination of that data, first-party data, third-party data, derived data, to help shepherd that transaction. And I'm with you on that. I think there's well-defined rules right now. I think what's more interesting when you start thinking about data is more, how much will the buyers expose, right? You have a bid request coming in from the pub side, right, from the seller, and he's sending that out to buyers. And buyers are coming back with their bid responses. That's just how RTB works. The question is, how open are the buyers going to be with disclosing to the sellers, right, what they're trying to target, right? And how discreet are they going to be? We've done some early work with, and this is public knowledge, so you can look it up, but we've done some work, a combination of ourselves, Freewheel, and ABC, and an agency, to try and do that in a premium setting, where it's long-form video content. And we're starting to do what we call audience guaranteed type deals, where the buyer does actually expose what they want to achieve and what data they're using to achieve that with. And it gives the seller an ability then to respond and say, well, okay, based on what I hear you want, I can package up inventory in a way. But again, instead of doing this through an ad server where I'm manually trying to manage how much demand I'm putting against what supply and how I'm manually moving things around, machines do it. So I think there's going to be ways and means that we'll see newer forms of transacting happening. Part of this data thing to unlock it as well was it was clear that the publisher wasn't going to do this in a non-committed, non-guaranteed fixed price environment either. And the seller realized that they can't go and get this inventory or use their data in a non-reserved second price auction environment. So that's why I mentioned to you right up front, right? I think you're going to also start seeing new transacting models emerge that are layered on top of RTB that look very different from what we might think of today happens in display in a remnant, non-guaranteed, non-reserved second price auction environment. I think there's some really interesting things happening right now at the top end of the industry and at the brand side of the business.
And that is quite, yeah, sorry,
if I may just, on the question of fundamentally data ownership as well, the consequence of an environment in which a brand or an agency understands that they are able to, in a transparent and in a safe manner, push their data into a system that, one, makes sense of it, two, makes it actionable, is a empowering moment for the demand side of the business, where if you consider, it sort of weaves in some of the first question that we were seeking to tackle, which is the rise of programmatic. Why is it happening? Well, one of the reasons is traditionally, when a marketer has a piece of information that a publisher learns is valuable, the publisher does one and only one thing, which is to raise the price of the inventory to enable the acting on that piece of information. When you have, when you transform that relationship and when you create a transparent and buy-side relationship with a platform that is designed and engineered to execute on that piece of information that no one else has, you have an arbitrage. You have an informational arbitrage in a good way. You have the ability to act on that piece of information in a way that no one else is able to act on. And what that further incentivizes from the demand side of the business is to move away from metrics like the CPC or the CTR, or metrics that, if we really think about it, don't push product off shelves, don't correlate with great outcomes. What they are incentivized to do is to think about actual ROI. What they're incentivized to do is to push in data that, again, no one else has in the marketplace, and that indicate the value of individual consumers, and corresponding to that, the price that they're willing to pay. And if they are willing to pay too little and someone else wins, then we move on, because there are about 3.25 trillion impressions to sort through on a monthly basis. But if you win, and when you get this right, with the right technology and the right inputs, ROI, to a degree that the industry has not been able to stand up before, proceeds. So at the core here is that it's a great question around data ownership. It has lots of ramifications for how the business and how the industry moves forward.
Absolutely, and both of you raised very valid points there as well. I particularly like the kind of new transaction models as well, and the fact that you can have these overlays. So I suppose that begs the question, and it is that the white elephant time, the elephant in the room time. What then becomes the role of the agency? Does the agency have to remodel itself? Does it have to change the way it works? in terms of programmatic? Where does that leave them now?
I don't think it's just the agency. I think this is impacting. I don't know. Show of hands. How many publishers are sitting here in the room today? One. How many buyers are sitting in the room? It has to be the rest of you, right? Because who else are you? Okay. I mean,
not gate crashers.
Just off the street.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming.
Are you meant to be from the Pellet Export Conference?
I think this is the type of question that's ideal for an audience, right? Like, I mean, of course you're going to be impacted. Everybody is impacted by this, right? I think this change is happening, and it's impacting buyers, it's impacting sellers, it's impacting technology vendors, like the two of us that are sitting here. It's impacting creative media agencies, third-party vendors that bring their own solutions, data vendors, validation, metrics companies. It's impacting everybody, right? And everybody has to rethink and reimagine, I think, their businesses. And on the agency side specifically, I think many times this gets set up as a question like, the brands are going to go direct to the publishers, and what happens to trading desks and agencies? I think it's a false question. It's just not. It's not true. It's not going to, giving an answer to that doesn't help us in any way, shape, or form, because I don't think it's a real question, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
It's okay. I think it's a real question. It definitely came out. I think people are asking it, so I've got to put it forward because it's what
I think they changed their business, right? I think the activity that they do, where maybe before they aggregated media and they did a lot of ad trafficking, right, goes away. And I think what they start doing is become smarter around how they use data, smarter about who they partner with. They buy in new and interesting ways, right? They do new transacting models. They sometimes buy an auction method. Sometimes they do fixed price. Sometimes they do guaranteed deals, non-guaranteed, with passback, without passback. I mean, there's going to be a multitude of activity that they'll engage in, and it's not going to be the menial work, but hopefully higher order type functions.
So it's almost about remodeling and being smart with what they do and finding new ways to work.
I think so.
I'll happily answer. I'll happily go in. I think it's a real question. I think every constituent in the ecosystem needs to have a good answer to the question of how programmatic marketing affects their business. Having spent a great deal of time in markets outside the United States, I have seen and witnessed this transformation in markets in Europe and markets in Asia, and of course here and in Latam, where markets are at different stages of that evolution. And I think in our portfolio of clients, what we see is, 5 years ago, the trading desk was invented, and it sought to capitalize on programmatic technology and show a new product to brands and to marketers that could scale media goals to greater degrees than prior. What happened as a result of that is that they were successful, and what happened also was that they were line items on media plans. So the media buyer and the agency would go to the brand and pitch the trading desk solution. Those trading desks were successful on the whole in growing budget month on month. And at some point, the media plan gets too big on a line item basis. And marketers start to ask questions. Well, what is going on here? Why is this performing so much better than my other, than what you're planning for me? And that provokes questions about how we can create more impact and more performance and more scale and grow marketing budgets over time. That leads to questions about data ownership. That leads to questions about the relationship that the brand seeks to have with the technology, certainly in a more direct way. That's not necessarily a scary proposition for the agency. The question of what role the agency plays in that situation where the brand says, look, I have valuable data. I want to make sure that it is not abused in the marketplace. I want to standardize my audience segments on this system. Great. Now what happens is a very useful question of who's going to operate this thing. And what also happens is the question of how can we activate those assets from the agency that most impact what happens when marketers standardize their data within this environment. And some of the useful answers are happening, and we're reading about them every day. So, Xaxis sort of changing its orientation to the market and focusing on how it can aggregate supply on behalf of WPP, which has about $85 billion to spend on marketing and probably has more influence in the marketplace than does any constituent brand, right? Any individual brand. So you start to think about that and you say, well, let's think creatively about how we can stand up a proposition that brings the very best of the agency to the table, activates, for example, of many, that media buying capability on behalf of a brand who is using a best-in-class technology to grow its budget over time. So there's a triumvirate here, right? There is a relationship that is the technology, that is the brand, that is the agency. The roles are changing. The result is better return for the marketer, which grows budget over time and makes everybody very happy when that happens, right? So I think 3 or 4 years ago, this question was very polarizing, and folks like me in charge of sales for a global demand-side platform, I was sweating these questions. I just think that the conversation has matured, and I think that there are very clear incentives for all constituents in the ecosystem to work on behalf of making marketing more efficient.
And absolutely, I agree totally. And actually, it's a great thing for the industry that it started to get to that level, isn't it? And people are understanding where we're going. So that kind of brings us nicely on to kind of the next level, really, of programmatic. Kind of what are we going to see next? What's the next thing? Obviously, we've seen with the digital advertising, it works perfectly with that. Where are we looking when it comes to TV? Will we see a point of how do we use programmatic in TV buying?
Well,
I love, by the way, that we have a soundtrack for the question. It's coming
This
next.
is it. It's for the next stage.
Are we like being ushered off the stage?
No, not yet.
It's all staged.
I've kept our clock on 23.
Yeah, I was like, I'm waiting for the
moved.
clock to count down, and it's still 23 minutes here. I'll take a stab at that. So Adap TV and AOL Platforms has made some big announcements around some of the tools that we've launched. We've got partnerships with Magna and ABC and others in the television space where we are starting to see some automation happening even in that space. And just folks, this is an industry that for 60 years has not changed in any way, shape or form from a tools perspective, or very little, I would say. It's also very fragmented, and there's very big players in it. Everybody from cable to satellite to broadcasters with different systems, disparate systems. But I think what we're starting to see is the automation in television is happening. It will probably happen at the edges of the transaction. So if you think of the value chain, or if you think of the transactional process, you have a planning and forecasting phase, you have an ad operations phase, an optimization phase, and a post-campaign analytics and reporting phase. I think what we're going to see in the TV space is that a lot of the automation, and we're seeing this because we've got tools in that space, and there's others that also play there, is happening at the beginning and the end of that transaction. So a lot of the planning and forecasting is where we've spent a lot of our time, enabling brands and advertisers to better understand how they can buy television in a more automated fashion through tools, understanding audience makeups, again, transacting in GRPs, TRPs, the type of metrics that the TV guys transact in, and do it in automated ways. And then we're also doing a lot of post-campaign attribution and multi-channel type of targeting and multi-channel type of reporting as well. So that's where I think a lot of the automation will start. I think there's a very big, hairy, set of tough things to do in the middle, which is the ad insertion. I think that'll take longer to automate in television, but make no mistake, the internet protocol is being used everywhere. It's being used on your phone, it's being used on desktop. It will go into television. It will go into broadcast, and at some point, everything will be IP delivered. And once that happens, then you truly will have cross-device, cross-channel, cross even ad format. It will be display, it will be mobile, it will be video, all delivered the same way.
And you talk about the kind of hairy bit in between. Is that a case where you could say that, is there a fear that would, once it goes into television, that it would devalue the kind of premium commercial spots? Programmatic do that in terms of...
Listen, right now in television, nothing is done in an auction-based environment, okay? Yet there is still a lot of automation happening, right? The auction model, second price auction, non-guaranteed, that transacting probably won't happen in television in a very long time, in my opinion. Not very long, but in a significant time frame. It's a lot of fixed price, guaranteed deal. It looks, and they still do the deals on the napkins like they used to before, but now a lot more of the planning and the forecasting and the post-campaign analytics is actually happening in tools rather than in Excel spreadsheets. So that's been our experience and where we think the space is going. And we're building towards that with our partners, be they on the supply side, the broadcasters and the content, and be they the advertisers on the other end.
And is that a similar story for you, Eric? Do you think that? What's your kind of views on where it goes with television?
No, I think it's down and to the right. I think it's over for this programmatic thing.
I mean, it's a $280 billion worldwide industry, okay? They have a lot of buying power. You know, in the US alone, it's 70 billion, right? I mean, this is massive numbers, right? We get excited about display and digital video, but the truth of it is that sight, sound, and motion, it's the ultimate form of advertising. It's the ultimate form of storytelling, right? It's also going to be probably the last of the media types that will move to programmatic. But we've seen it in search, display, mobile, and digital video was next, and linear television will be next. I think that's a natural progression of where we're going.
We have a saying in Mediamath: if it has an IP address, it will be optimized. And it obviously describes the relentless tendency of media to become connected and automated. This will be a very boring world if in a couple of years all we're doing is chucking display ads around the internet. Consumers demand richer experiences. They demand more relevant experiences across multiple devices. It compels organizations like ours and Hank's to create multi-channel propositions. Indeed, today, great deal of diversity of media type within our own technology, display and social and mobile and video, and now beginning into TV, which, while limited scale, again, we're going to see the same push rooted in the concept and the actuality that marketers want to capitalize on their data, and they want to find consumers wherever they are in a non-creepy kind of a way. So I think we're going to see a great deal more multi-channel from a media perspective. From a data perspective, things get more interesting. I think we live in primarily a cookie-based world. I don't think that cookies are dead. I do think that they are on their way out. When they're there, they're very reliable, but the problem is that they're not there 40% of the time. So, something that we are working on is and putting into the market is a connected ID solution that fuses together and rationalizes the fact that you saw somebody on a mobile device in an application and then saw them on a desktop, and the ability to tie those things together. And that opens up a great deal of opportunity, again, to capitalize on the data assets that marketers have. The next thing I think we will see in much more clarity and scale is real discussions about marketing attribution. So if you consider, once you have the media proposition at scale, once you have the data proposition that says you can get your messages in front of consumers across those media channels, the logical next question is, how do you spend money in the most effective way, given the different ways in which users interact with media type in those individual channels? So those things have the ability to transform yet further what we see in the programmatic marketplace.
That's actually quite interesting, because I was suddenly thinking there, actually almost the new tools you're developing is almost a way of kind of working out where someone is going next after they've been on the telephone, which kind of, I suppose, one of the big things obviously with the programmatic data is that you can retarget these people. But I suppose if you can work out where they're going to go from one device to the next, is there a case that perhaps we could see pre-targeting? So actually, you will know when someone's toaster's about to blow up before they buy it. So, TFOW are there and the ad comes in from TFOW. Do you think pre-targeting is something that data would allow you to do?
I thought you were going to go down the pre-crime,
yes,
storyline.
Almost like
Tom
Minority
Cruise,
Report.
and I'm like, wow, Minority Report. It's getting scary.
I saw that movie. It was a little creepy. But retargeting as a concept and as a product in the market, I think is super interesting. Obviously, the ability to reach a consumer in a targeted way when you know a lot of information about them is great. I think what's neglected in the retargeting world is actually capitalizing on that data to find new customers. So, congratulations, you can find your current customers and upsell them, and that is certainly important, and not deriding that practice. The real labor, from an algorithmic perspective, the real work is in, I don't know that I'd say pre-targeting, but it is the creation of meaningful models that find users who are likely to mimic the behavior of your most valuable customers. And it's with and again, coming back to the accumulation of data and the pushing of that data, it is the fact that marketers are now willing to, and agencies now willing to, push data into a centralized place learn about and gain insights from the behaviors of those consumers that leads to the opportunity to create holistic models that work across channel to bring an understanding of ROI. So yes, pre-targeting, or maybe we'll call it prospecting,
Yes.
central to the practice. And I'll just one more beat on this, which is separating retargeting from all of this is just a terrible idea. It is you're just sort of wasting opportunity to learn a great deal about your customers in order to find new ones, which is really ultimately what we're trying to do.
And then I suppose my last question, because I'm worried we are running out of time, even though it does say 23, I do believe we've been 40 minutes, so we are getting near to
And
the
it's
end.
11 p.m.
But yeah, exactly. It feels like that for me, trust it. I suppose that last one, we were going to have a third panelist, which you may have seen in the book, which was going to be from JWT, a creative agency. So we were just going to talk about the creative aspect, because I know these two hate that bit, but it's come up a lot. I was at Adweek on Monday and Tuesday, and actually a lot of the sessions there, you had the Clash of the Titans, they were calling it, making them these big enemies. But actually, when you talk about things like retargeting, perhaps prospective targeting, they actually have to be creative in the very sense that they're together. So I just wanted to kind of gauge your opinions on kind of creativity and programmatic, and that, are they good bedfellows?
Totally. It's super empowering to be able to create the right creative experience for a customer about which the brand knows a great deal. Why would those be strange bedfellows? One of the things that we see in the marketplace today is creative agencies getting into this programmatic world directly. So consider if you're able to flight campaigns with offers and with creative variation that you can put into the market within 15 minutes in discrete geographies across discrete segments and test the best performers, why wouldn't you do that before delivering those creative assets to the agency, right? What a wonderful way to ensure that you're going to market with the strongest proposition. I mean, beyond that is dynamic creative, tried and true, works wonderfully well, and enriching the experience of customers by enabling the creative agency to understand how best to create those experiences. It's part of the data exhaust of what we do in the marketplace, and making that information available to the creative agency such that they can act on it meaningfully is a wonderful idea, and it's happening today. So I don't see a strange bedfellow problem here. We can all get together and grow budgets.
If I agree, can we go home now?
Yeah, we can. We're on to the questions.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, from a technical perspective, it's just another macro in the bid request stream. It's that simple, right? It's not strange bedfellows. I think we see it all day long. I think it enhances the experience for the consumer. When I go online, I actually do appreciate when the ad actually speaks a little bit more to me. It does get a little creepy when the ad follows me around, sure. But when it's an interactive ad with some sort of call to action that actually allows me to put my zip code in and get something back immediately, and that actually works for me, I think that's great. And I think the misnomer is that we think that being creative, I think it's more about people thinking deep brand integration, and I need to be able to work with the brand to do something really unique. The reality is you can do a lot of that, and you'd be surprised how many tools there are out there today that lets you do that in real-time environments, or near real-time, that you can act on the latest news that's coming in off of a news feed and get something out and create it and tailor it for 15 DMAs and get it done. So yeah, I think we've seen the same experience. It's not strange.
I have plenty more questions, but I realise my time is almost up, and I could sit here all day because I'm actually quite enjoying this. Hopefully that has been very enlightening for you guys. Would you like to ask the panel any questions? Please to raise your hands if you would. Come on, don't let me down, room. We've had 3 sessions in here, and there's been a question each time. I don't want to end without one in our last session. Come on.
There was one person that says they're a publisher. So how about the one person who's the publisher?
We've got a gentleman over here.
Look, we've got questions. Here we go. Brilliant.
Hello, good afternoon. My question was around online and offline, or kind of TV cable integration. Like how does that really happen, where you can show a consumer an ad on TV and then eventually follow them as they move on through other devices, all the way through kind of making a sale?
Sure. I'll take a little stab, right? I think it all boils down to the fact that in the digital side of the house, we use cookies, right, as a way to track people, right? It's a way to identify and you know, there's some interesting things that Facebook is doing with Atlas now. They obviously have a massive footprint, logged in users. They can create device IDs across multiple, you know, desktop, display. The same thing is happening in linear television. These cable boxes have the capability of passing a device ID. I can match that device ID to some sort of online cookie, right, and match that. So with a combination of deterministic and, you know, machine learning, you're creating sets of users across these different channels. And then when you see them in those channels, you can target them. But this is why I'm with Eric, right? The cookie doesn't go away. I think it just, it gets augmented, right? With a combination of the cookie as the medium in IP environments. And then when you're in environments that don't have IPs, you're using some sort of device ID. And you're marrying these things together over time and creating the ability to then target across different channels. Does that answer the question? Listen, it's not an easy, I don't think anybody has nailed it, right? There's going to be big questions about, you know, but what does the device ID tell me about who the users are, right? You know, this is why you still have Nielsen using a combination of panel data as well as cookie data, right? Facebook data, you know, together to derive at what the audience looks like, as an example.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I realise that is the end. Thank you for keeping us with the last question. Let's give a round of applause to our two panellists, Henk and Eric.
Thanks.
That was good. I could have done it. Cheers.